Okay, we're back. I don't even know what episode this is. This is 5, I think.
4 or 5, one of them.
One of them. Yeah.
Yeah. But we wanted to dive deeper into curiosity, right? Like,
Yes.
because we didn't give ourselves the requisite time to explore that. That's a topic beyond 20 minutes. So
yeah,
why don't you take us where you want to take it from when it comes to which aspect of curiosity you want to dive deeper into?
I guess just the concept of leaning into curiosity, and I want to say this not so flippant like it's just super easy. It can be quite challenging, and I know that from my own life. But leaning into curiosity, I think, has lots of benefits. And that one is it helps you personally with, being reflective, formulating questions, asking from a place of I don't know versus I'm going to direct it or I'm going to assume. And also, I think it shows the other person or people you're talking to that you're actually trying to find something out about them as opposed to telling them something, right? So if I say, hey, Gabe, tell me what it was like growing up wherever you lived in, 10 years ago, and you would tell a story about it as opposed to, hey, you must have had this happen to you, right? Different. If I'm curious, I'm asking because I don't know, and I may learn something, and that'll be what it's going to be. And I think organically things start from there. So I guess that's the lead in.
Mm-hmm. And I think the mindset of consistently not understanding that one doesn't know and just having the relationship with one's individual ego to even articulate that is huge. Like, I don't know, or I'm wrong and I'll do a better job, or I'll do this differently next time. There's been many instances in my own culture and my own, I've seen in traditional Chinese men in my family they should be able to, not shit is the wrong word. A resolution would have been reached much sooner. All that needed to be was, sorry, like that's my bad. But then when people push against each other, no, like I want, you're doubling, tripling, quadrupling down on this is the stance and not being curious to how to fix this, but as opposed to doubling down and being, I guess, you're curious to a different extent of curious to how to continue to pad my point of view, then that creates dissonance.
I agree. And I think what you described there is a little bit leaning into the part where ownership. It's difficult for me to apologize, acknowledge fallibility, not double down, but say, okay, you know what? I could have done better. I maybe didn't say that or communicate that in the best way.
Mm-hmm.
What would be better, right? We're trying to work from a place where I stop focusing on the negative part as in I'm wrong, but it's, you know what? I think I could have done that better. I acknowledge that, but we try to go that way. And that's really, really difficult because that allow you, in order to do that, you have to take ownership. Mm-hmm. Ownership is hard. And so there's a book I'm reading, it's called The 4 Pivots, but basically the Dr. Jin Wright talks about what we call mirror work. Basically, mirror work is self-reflective practice. And it talks a lot similarly about leaning into curiosity, because I think where that starts with, along with a lot of other things, is inward. If I'm going to have difficulty leaning into curiosity with you or a group of people, if I can't do it for myself,
mm-hmm.
if I can't ask myself the reflective, curious questions, well, why do I feel like that? Why does that bother me? Why do I like this? What's good about that? Right. And so that practice is reflective practice, and it because you can't hide the truth from you can't hide the truth from yourself, but you're looking
not forever though.
Not forever. Right? And not if you want to improve.
Yep. And I think there's ways we've talked about this concept ad nauseum off camera and maybe 1 or 2 times in the first couple episodes, scaffolding to get there. Mm-hmm. Like, what are the ways, what are really non-consequential activities and interactions you can apply this? So for me, I coach U13 girls basketball, and we have game film. So I send it out to the families after the games, because not all families can make games; they have lives. And I was going over the game film and saying, like, on practice after a successful game, saying, "Hey girls, we scored 40 points last game, and if we do that every time, we should be able to hypothetically win most games at this level." And then our captain, one of our two captains spoke and was like, actually, coach, we got 36.
Okay.
And in my mind, I was like, the whole time I was like, yeah, I thought we got 40, but I guess you must have watched it enough to, because the scoreboard was at the back of the video. I was like, yeah, like I had to make a quick decision there, be like, okay, insert athlete's name. You're right. Because I could have just doubled down and be like, no, like, especially like a 13-year-old girl to a 30-year-old man, like I have all the dynamic there. I could have just been like, no, like, are you sure? Like, but just to even give her that benefit of the doubt, be like, yes, I trust that you watched it because you're one of our captains and you spoke. And the fact that you had the courage to even say that in front of the whole group and hypothetically challenge me. I don't really believe someone's challenging me unless they're posturing to an extent. But in that environment of a team basketball environment with a group of people I care about, that wasn't a challenge. That was more of a, hey, actually, like, coach, like, those 36.
Well, I think part of that, yes, part of that's some courage, but part of that I think is that you probably, and we've talked about this off camera quite a bit, is that you probably set the culture where differing opinions and things that we can say are okay to say. If I'm in a culture where, coach is not going to receive it well if I even am a whiff of disagreement or that he's wrong. So, but I think she felt empowered to do so because in this environment, if I say that, it's going to be okay and you'll receive it. And instinctively, you just talk the process. Hey, I think, well, maybe she's right. Okay, well, I'm going to acknowledge that.
And she was right, by the way. I went back to watch it. I was like,
but it's not even about whether or not she's right or she's wrong. It's about she felt that this is what I think it is, and I'm going to say so. And you're like, okay, well, yeah. And so in this hierarchical relationship that we often have with, students or other folks who are in our charge or care or taking leadership role over, it's that hierarchical relationship. Sometimes people view it as you are better than you, as opposed to you're there to lead us, but my voice has value too. I can say things and you don't and shouldn't and can't know everything all the time. That's real. But you are very experienced and you have lots of skills and you're here for a reason. So I think if we look at it from that perspective, and then it's easier to have this thing where kids, people, students feel comfortable to say, hey, you know what? I think it's this.
So I guess in that situation, I think that's something you and I are conscious of and can do so conscious of now that we've reached the state of subconscious capability, as we call it in psychology, where we just allow people to ask us questions or to make remarks because we create these environments. So like, what's the first step of someone who may not have experienced this to be like, hey, I just want to, if I'm consistently having disagreements with someone, say in my family, and without naming names, but how does one make that first step to be like, hey, maybe I extend my hand. The person doesn't have to take it, but I'm going to extend my hand.
I think once again, lots of our conversations revolve on context. So we talked about a leadership context where people we're leading or interacting with are not our family. So they don't have, they don't know the buttons to push. They don't know things. They don't have some of the experiences, but your mother, your brother, your sister, your that's a different situation.
Your friend.
Yes, your friend. Excellent example, right? Someone who is not necessarily blood family, but is close to you. That extending of that hand is that can be difficult. And I think that's something that you model quite a bit, is that I want to know myself. And if I know myself, I think that'll be easier. Because if I know that, hey, I think I should be able to, you know what, extend the hand and understand that someone's not going to slap it away. But if I'm not sure if I do that, that's not safe.
And I think it's important as well to not be offended if someone's not taking the hand, continuing their hand, or just not taking you up on the offer of like to dive into curiosity right away. Because not every single time you want to be curious, the proverbial you in scare quotes, not all the time is the right context, environment, situation for it. Like if we're gonna have a difficult conversation, we again in scare quotes, we need to like set a time about this. Be like, hey, like this is the premise of this conversation we're about to have. I'm gonna come in it with like this mindset, please be prepared. But like so often, I think people expect others to be curious, but they're like, you're ready for the conversation. But the other person, you're just bombarding the other person with this the challenging misnomer, and then where does that person go from there?
It's hard. I think even that what you said, that lead in. So I would appreciate that lead in. Hey, you know what? Well, we're going to have a challenging conversation. Please be prepared. Somebody will be like, what do you mean?
95% of people haven't been told that.
What do you mean be prepared? Right? That may feel immediately as threat. Oh my gosh, you want to have a real deep conversation?
To me, that's not threat though. That's me caring about you.
And
I want you to be ready for this.
And I think that part is missing from our, I guess, training or lack thereof of social dialogue. And that if I come to you and I say, hey, you know what, I want to have a discussion and I'm ready with this. Can you come ready too? I think that displays an immense level of care. I think that displays an immense level of, I'm interested and invested in this relationship and I'm asking you to do something to further it. And I think that could be perceived as, oh, you're putting a lot of pressure on me. Again,
sure.
Right?
Yeah, that is a perception.
That could be a perception, but I think that being curious about it would be like, okay, well, why does Gabe want to talk to me about this? What's so serious about it? As opposed to, oh my gosh, that's a lot of pressure. I think I should just say yes and then maybe cancel.
Yeah. Or if you want to take it a step further, like after you've established that, like, I want to talk to you about X, about, I don't know,
whatever.
Yeah, there's so many things we
can Yeah.
But I think if I have a deep enough and a trusting enough relationship with someone in my life, I would really appreciate those two factors of authentication. A, this is what we're doing. B, this is what we're talking about. And then C is a variable because that takes two people to dance to solve it out, by like at least lay out like A, E, and then C will get there.
Well, as a sidebar, I think that these sort of skills should be taught to like kids like from like kindergarten, like low, because if conflict resolution,
why'd you take my Lego, man?
What?
Straight up,
mother Lego, right? Yeah. So hey, well, because I wanted to. Well, I want it too, right? So we have some conflict over something that to adults or others may seem trivial, but this is their world in the moment, and this is what it is. Mm-hmm. And I think if we're able to catch them at that time and inject, okay, well, both of you have a valid desire, position, or whatever, but how do we address the fact that we've come to this point, and we should try and inject the fact that conflict is not necessarily negative, and it not necessarily means to a fight or adversarial situation, but there is a conflict. How do we address, discuss, resolve? Mm-hmm. If resolution is necessary or even possible now. But I think we always have this, any Disney movie you've ever watched has a happy ending. Well, that's not how life works. We don't always get a happy ending after everyone's gone through the montage and had struggle and built the thing and fought the bad guy and then won. That's not how it works. I think if we
continue, sorry to interrupt, if we continue the fucking movie,
could
give it 20 more minutes and we see one more week, it's not going to be happy no more,
right? So, and I think those are, while, it's nice to have, happy endings and those messages, I think it's also nice to have realistic things. Like, you know what? Sometimes conflict doesn't end in resolution, but part of the process of discussing and addressing and working through allows us to lean into curiosity and say, hey, you know what, dude, I don't agree with that at all. But, how did you come to believe that, as the example goes, right?
Yep. And I sent you a conversation, like two people on the Opinion Science podcast, shout out to them, had a similar but different conversation a couple months ago about how to have a curious conversation. And we're taking this down the same branch of a different tree. Different branch of the same tree. And one of the speakers on that podcast, she remarked that if I were you, I would feel that way as well. And I think that's a huge part in just recognizing that the person opposite of you has a complete different set of life experiences that has informed how they are coming at this situation in which you and that person are diverging. And this you can talk about trauma informed
Mm-hmm.
if you want,
Mm-hmm.
but you can take it wherever. But like that's a big piece, that just recognizing the other person we've gone through different shit.
Absolutely. I think we're talking a lot about trauma-informed leadership and care and those concepts more recently. But as we discussed in the car on the way here, I think lived experiences, it shouldn't just be focused on one set of group of people. Everyone has lived experiences. And if we acknowledge that everyone has lived experiences, we have to acknowledge that trauma and bad things happen as part of the human experience. There's no way to avoid it. No one gets a pass on it. And so if I want to be curious about why we're having this discussion, disagreement, or whatever, I think if we're able to lean in the fact that, okay, you've had a set of experiences that have informed you in this way, it is not wrong because there's no rightness or wrongness about it. Mm-hmm. It's what it is. How do I continue to engage with you in a way that recognizes who you are, a person, but also doesn't sacrifice the fact that I don't agree with that shit, but I can find out much as I can about you and we can have a discussion.
Yeah. Because something else is as well, like trauma for them, to use the example of like race and privilege, for example, if someone was rewarded for something that traumatized another, that also informs who they are. Like we are all informed by reward systems as well. Mm-hmm. Like we go back to kindergarten class, for example, like, all right, cool. Like 5-year-old Gabe takes Lego from 5-year-old Arette. No consequences. I'm going to do that shit again. So, and we take that to the adult level. There's a host of different examples we can use there.
And over time, like it's not like it wasn't a conspiracy or an explicit message. It just was what it was reinforced by action or inaction.
Yep.
Right. Right. You just, okay, well
and inaction sometimes is very loud.
Yes. Right. Yes. And
because people in positions of leadership don't step in because of discomfort. Let's go with that.
And, I saw this a bunch with my own son in elementary school. Just what I saw was statements of desire for a certain culture, but when it came down to acting in support of those desires, that was a much more difficult proposition. I could say that we treated everybody the same, but when pointed out that certain people weren't being treated the same, I would ask, what did you do? Mm-hmm. And oftentimes I was met with avoidance or basically nothing, but a statement of belief. And I think that a lot of times we believe things, but belief is really in the front. It's not in the back, right? It's not in the limbic system where we learned a bunch of stuff. And so some of that stuff's really low and deep, and I respond to it differently than what I believe I would, because I think we talked about this before. Remember, there was a picture.
We've talked about a lot of things.
Yeah. Picture.
You let me know.
I remember this conversation. It stuck with me. One of our earlier conversations, there was a picture of everybody doing the Sig Heil in a picture, and one little girl was not doing it.
Yep.
And you talk about people, how everyone thought, oh yeah, if that was me, I wouldn't have done it. And you said something that still sticks with me to this day, is that, you know what? I think people are really don't have a good sense of their own agency, right? They think that they would do this, but realistically, in that, if taken that context in that moment, that was crowd groupthink, and to go against the grain would take extraordinarily high amount of courage, but also that there will be consequences if you don't, immediate and longitudinal, and it may be, and they also may be existential. Maybe your life will be threatened if you don't follow this thing, even though you don't believe it. And I think a lot of people think, oh yeah, I would always do the right thing given the situation. I don't think that that's true.
Yeah, hypothetically, I'm a perfect person.
Hypothetically,
let's talk about how I show up in the real world.
Yeah,
whole different thing. But like, let's also, I'm an optimist.
Yeah,
as you know. So I'm going to flip this a little bit, because the opposite of that is also, if you don't fall in line with a culture you believe in, it's also completely different. Let's go back to the basketball example. If someone doesn't believe in my ways of teaching, of creating this subculture where each athlete can also question the person, the adult male who is 15 to 17 years older than them, then that person would not conform. and then everyone who has bought into, we can all have civil disagreement, then the person who acts out only is selfish, doesn't engage in a harmonious relationship with each of her teammates, that becomes the person who doesn't raise his or her fist in a Nazi rally.
The nonconformist.
Yeah, but in a different way of like, you're not conforming to something that good we've built.
I think we talked a little bit about discomfort, but nonconformity, I think, is oftentimes viewed in the negative or the pejorative, and sometimes folks who are
meaning
negative connotation, not nice, right? So if I say that someone who, for example, again in school, I'll use my own experience example, is that you're supposed to be there, you're supposed to appear in a way, you're supposed to sit in a way, you're supposed to receive this thing in a way, and if you don't, you are non-conforming. Ergo, you are automatically a problem as opposed to, okay, leaning into curiosity. Okay, why doesn't this person behave like those others? Why won't they accept this thing that they're being given that most others do? And as opposed to attributing the positive connotation to the many who will just conform and just accept, we attach a negative connotation to the ones who don't, as opposed to saying, hey, well, why don't they? And maybe it leads to larger questions. This environment wasn't made for them, and it's difficult for them, and they don't want to conform, and maybe they shouldn't, because it's not going to be good for them. But their lived experience tells them that if they don't, there'll be punishments, there'll be pressure, there'll be on and on.
Because hypothetically, I think the easy part is for me, is to promote wellness, caring, community, all that.
Mm-hmm.
But I think hypothetically, if one of the girls on my team did not buy in, having to work with that athlete to change her mind surrounding this would have been much, much more rewarding to me, hypothetically, because I didn't have to go through this, much more rewarding to me than just everyone being like, okay, cool, Coach Gabe is cool with us. He's someone we respect and someone we can talk to about things within reason. But if I had to break through to that person as an educator, as a basketball, as an athletic educator, that'd be some of the most rewarding shit in my life.
I agree. I oftentimes so as you know, I try to set the culture in my own classroom, and I find that much like you talk about, there will be some I can tell from the jump and throughout, there's no buy-in. They're like, nah, not me. I'm not the one. Versus some who'll be like, you know what? I thought this way, but now I'm based on what you're saying, what's happening, I'm feeling different, conflicted, whatever about it. And then the rewarding part to me is when they start to ask the questions about what's going on with it, because that's where the reflection is. If you've presented something that's new to me, I have not necessarily bought in, but I haven't been resistant to it. I've accepted it. I'm digesting it. I'm processing it. I'm working through it, but I still have doubt. I'm not sure. But then, as opposed to them saying, actually, you know what, this is a bunch of bullshit, I'll go back to the old way. They were like, okay, well, I'm not sure. This is what's going on with me, and this is what's happening. And I think that's the part where I'm like, okay, this is where I can, as an educator, I can nudge, give a little bit of advice, a little bit of guidance. And I've sort of tried to lean back on advice and more into guidance, because, I have opinions and judgments about a lot of things. I can give you advice on all kinds of stuff. But if I'm like, I hear what you say, I'm like, okay, well, have you thought about this? Have you thought about what you're already doing? The question you just asked me, have you dug deep into that? Right? I'm really trying to get them to go back into that reflective process, because the thing that I find is that difficult questions oftentimes lead to other more difficult questions, and that's not necessarily a bad thing.
It's a great thing.
Right? How I heard it was spectacular questions usually lead to more spectacular questions, so which is a nicer way to put it.
Can I reframe that as well? I think
sure.
The quality of question also creates the quality of conversation. Because I think that if it's a question, if I was one of your students, for example, if it's a question that I can just Google that doesn't allow for me to derive maximum value from you, because all I had to do was Google that and go to maybe the seventh result as opposed to the first one. But if it's something that's a subset of that first question in which I am curious now about the topic because I've done independent learning, now I can extract more value for this thing I'm paying for. Because now this is level 2 of this shit. We're at level up.
I just thought of something. But basically, what you're saying, it didn't to me that I think curiosity is question driven as opposed to answer driven. Because if I'm trying to be curious about what your experience is, I'm not necessarily looking for tell me the answer so I can go. I'm looking for connectivity. I'm looking for vulnerability. I'm looking to see if will share in something, learn something. I'll learn something more. It's not necessarily
looking for expertise. If
sure,
I want to see if this person, how deep this person can go, because if it's not on Google, like, does this person actually know beyond something I can just look up?
And this is in my perspective. In my own classroom, I try to ensure that you can Google a bunch of stuff, but what is the process? I teach a course on how to ask good questions, and one of the best ones that I found out of that course is, what is the result that you're hoping for that you're not getting now?
Mm-hmm.
And so why I like that question so much is because it's not a yes or no question. There's not a quick retort or answer. It's like, oh, well, what result am I hoping for? Do I actually even know what I'm hoping for? As opposed to someone told me, do this, and I'm trying to get there, but I don't actually know that that's what it is. I'm actually, what actually am I trying to get for? And then how is that different from what I'm getting now? There's a bunch of reflection. There's a bunch of comparison. And what it does, it doesn't promote a specific or a clean answer. It promotes a round of questioning and exploration and thought and then more research and then a round of questioning. And this is essentially the fundamental building blocks of critical thinking. If I can't think critically about things if I'm not able to question them, examine them, research, and go around and around and around. And then eventually I'm like, okay, you know what? I've done all this research. I've asked all these questions. This is what I think about it.
Mm-hmm.
Good. That's not a specific answer to an earlier simple question. It elucidated a process that by which I started with a question, I asked lots more, and I came down to maybe a thought process, an opinion or something. But I think it's a much better skill set to develop.
Mm-hmm. A philosopher has once said, I can't recall specifically which philosopher at this point, off the top of my head, that a person's mind, once expanded, doesn't shrink back to its original dimensions. So I think just be able to teach, not even a young person of any age, that to be like, all right, here are the ingredients to cook a mental meal. Go ahead and do it. But if you continue to give this person mental fast food, mental pre-made meals, then it doesn't allow for that independent way to get there. And I think that there's probably another saying that said, give a man a fish if he's be hungry
for a day or some. I know, yeah.
So that's a similar thing. But I think let's pivot off that, though, is on trauma-informed leadership. So there's one thing that I've been very curious about, though, and I'd like to discuss is how do you accept someone's trauma whose that experience to you is, for lack of a better term, nonsensical? As an example, was working with a young athlete once, and this person transmitted exact quotes, as I still remember this very clearly from a couple months ago. I am traumatized because I got removed from a group chat.
Okay.
And to me, and this person is much younger, so that experience is one of, let's say, 12,000, to put a number on it, as opposed to me as an older person, that'd be one of maybe 2.5 million. So rationalizing on my end that this is one of smaller amount of things lived, but at the same time, trying to still act upon trauma-informed leadership, I couldn't I couldn't just say, no, that's not a problem.
Right. Exactly. Right. You can't say that because you don't want to invalidate their experience. But I think what recently recently reading about is there's a popular idea of trauma and people use the word incorrectly. Now, in that example, that is an unpleasant or a bad experience. It sat with that person. It was important to that person, but I don't think that rises to the level of trauma and that we understand it clinically. But at the same time, what I again leading into curiosity, be like, okay, if hypothetically we could ask the person, say, well, why what made you feel bad about what was difficult about being removed from that? And maybe they'd go into, well, my friends were there, and then I said something, and then they didn't like it, and they said, and they kicked me out, and now I've been alienated the group. That would lean into
that person's only friends. We don't know.
We don't know, right? And we don't know that unless we ask and get into it. But this idea that trauma is any bad experience is not.
Yeah, I'd like to push back on that a little bit.
Right, right.
And if I could redo that conversation, I would probably go and say, after we unpack it, we help that young person upgrade the language surrounding it.
Yeah, I think that's a good way to go. Yeah.
But at first, we need to address the main thing. The main thing is like, you are unpleasant. It will address your performance with me putting a ball in a hoop or dribbling a basketball. And thank you for sharing with me. But afterwards, let's talk about the fact that like there are much bigger, there are things that, as you say, like that people are clinically traumatized with. And then there are things that are just a part of life that you have to learn to deal with as you get older.
Rejection.
Yeah.
Right. Those are things that are, and I think just based on what you're saying there about the person, if we're communicating with them and like, okay, you know what? Here are the context. I'm trying to get them to do something in this basketball, this practice, whatever. And what I'm getting from them is that they're carrying something around that's difficult for them to let go. In the clinical term, we call it rumination. But I'm stuck on these thoughts and it's bothering me. And literally it's affecting my performance. So whether or not it was traumatizing enough or it's a bad experience enough, I think what I would say, again, leading into curiosity, I would say, you know what, whatever this is, they're having a difficult time letting it go, having a difficult time existing and performing in the way they want to. So that's where we would address how do we get them to dig into it or not? Because maybe that's not your role as the coach. Your role is to try and say, okay, no, I've heard this. I can't sit them down and have a counseling session, but now I can recognize that they're going through something. And maybe I think, and this is what I think as it relates to somebody that's close to me, is that maybe I need to set a different set of expectations for this person because I can't fix, I can't cajole, I can't pressure, I can't do any of those things, yet they're still here. And I don't want to punish or penalize them for what they've obviously shared is something that's going on for them. And whether or not I think it's trivial or not, it is real and honest for them. And so, again, no answer.
Because we always operate from an incomplete set of information whenever we interact with someone. And working out this, etching this out a little bit further now, next time I see this person, I can just use that one thing that he said as I now have more information to have a better interaction. And I think that may be the main goal of curiosity.
I think you're just right. The nexus here of curiosity and the trauma-informed leadership, because if I'm informed about what it is and what it isn't, when I see certain behaviors or I hear certain comments, I can now use that to inform how do I support and interact with, as opposed to how do I fix or change. And so, because I can't, in my context, I can't do that here as a coach, educator. I can't fix or change, but I can, now that I know, I think, okay,
that's not our place.
That's not our place. And actually, it's not within my ethical boundary to try and get you to really divulge a bunch of that stuff so we can fix you. That I think is an ego-driven, egocentric thing. I'm here. I have knowledge. You tell me what it is, and I'm going to make it better for you. That is inward. That is not really, in my opinion, designed to help that other person. But if we're like, okay, now that I know this, okay, you know what? Next time we do this activity, assignment thing, I'll understand that your challenges are a little bit different, and I'll judge it through the lens of it's what I understand about you. and then we'll go from there.
Mm-hmm.
What can I do? What can I change? What can I support? What do I got to let go of?
Yeah. Because some days a student or an athlete can show up and that's climbing Mount Everest. And they might not even express that, but like
Right.
In order for us to effectively do that, I think the last piece that I'd like to touch on would be like observing what is unsaid and what is unspoken as well, to really gauge if someone is acting out of alignment to what they typically are. Well, first and foremost, the first step is do you give a shit enough as a educator, a leader, to first invest in this person, to know what this person is like on a typical day. And then afterwards, if this person is acting out of that range, and that person might not have the skill sets, learned experience, or just the courage, or in a 1 of 30 for you, 1 of 25 here, or like for me, if we're usually like a 1 of 12 to 16 environment, to be like, hey, like this is what I'm going through. I can still, in my head, without calling that out, be like, hey, why aren't you running hard today? If that person is not being the usual peppy, energetic, or just whatever the baseline effort level is, I can pull that person aside and just be like, hey, is everything okay? That's all I need. And if you don't need to tell me what's going on, is everything okay? If not, let's try again in 2 days, whenever the next session is, 2 days next week. And that's it.
That's it. I think that's easier said than done, especially depending on your leadership role. And again, also the knowledge of self, because if what you're describing is a complete picture, say, okay, you know what? I know who I am. I know how to support the folks in my care. I actually, and I say that not flippantly, but I actually care about these people, because I think it's Brené Brown talks about, it's difficult to lead people who you don't care about. If you don't give a shit about the people in front of you, you're not going to do that thing where you see, oh, that person's not running. Forget it. Whatever. Just run more, do suicides or whatever that nonsense is, right? As opposed to saying, hey,
do nothing.
Or do nothing, right?
That's also an option.
Right.
But
in what you described, you're like, okay, well, I care about this group. I care about this project. I'm here. I'm invested. I'm seeing stuff going on, but this individual person is standing out to me today in a way that they haven't before. That is engaging your thought process. Oh, what questions do I ask? How do I support them? How do I make sure that they feel safe? And I'm going to approach them and say, hey, you know what? Everything's okay. You don't have to say, but if it's not, that's cool. You don't have to share anything, but just basically you're communicating, I'm seeing something. I'm here for you. I'm available.
Like we talked about in the first, I think, I can't remember what the timestamp is.
Yeah.
The first 5 to 15 minutes of this, just extending the metaphorical hand. Person doesn't need to reach out, but I still, if you don't reach out, that doesn't stop me from continuing to try to help.
And if they don't take it, it doesn't mean that there's a problem.
No.
And I think just I think part of the act of reaching out also continue to model the fact that I'm doing this because I think that I can and I should. You're not obligated to accept, take, or. But I think my own experience is that when you model the ability to do it authentically, sometimes folks later, they're like, okay, you know what? Maybe I am ready to take it now. I wasn't before. I've heard you before. I knew something before, but I wasn't ready then.
Yeah.
But now I am. And can we go? And to me, those are the rewarding parts, because it tells me that they've done full circle, done some reflection, like, you know what? Let's hear more, talk more, or engage more.
And sometimes it's also, I have a younger colleague in my work in community service. Like she'll tell me pretty often, like once every hour. Sometimes it's not that deep.
Yeah.
And in this situation, if we just complete the loop of the athletic example, it could just be as simple as, and I've been told this before from an athlete, that I didn't eat breakfast today. It doesn't need to be like, oh, like there's domestic abuse at home.
Yeah.
Like whatever. It's not, sometimes it's not that deep. Sometimes it's just, I woke up late. I didn't eat. That's why I'm not running.
And maybe I didn't sleep well the night before. It's like sometimes it's like the domino effect of stuff that happens.
Yeah, like it doesn't have to be trauma in a clinical definition. It could just be, I had a shitty day.
Yes. And that happens to people. Dude, it happened to me recently. So, you know what? And that's the thing. I think like you mentioned before about, you know, how things were resolved if I was able to, as opposed to doubling down, just acknowledge fallibility and acknowledge that there's a different way. And I think that's also hard. I think you really have to be able to, it's, man, you know what? I'm just not having a good time right now, and I don't have the capacity to deal with this. So it's okay. I can acknowledge for myself that I'm not at my best, and that's okay too.
Yeah. And I think if one is truly curious about themselves as well,
mm-hmm.
I think then one is also, I'm just going to use I can also be compassionate about my performance level in that set of actions that day. Because if I recognize that it might not be that deep, in scare quotes, and today I just, didn't sleep well, and therefore my workout, for example, like this morning, my workout wasn't optimized.
Yeah.
I wasn't as strong as I was last week. Like, okay, like, what are the factors to that? Have I been stretching? Have I been recovering? What type of food have I been eating? Like 16 other factors go through your head. But then really the relationship with self, to first be curious with self, then now it can be like, okay, cool. That same relationship I had with the athlete to be like, what's wrong? I can now monitor that with myself.
And I think that is a skill that is really, I think it has immense power over the lifetime. So it reminds me, continuing the basketball analogy, the other day I was picking up my older son from basketball, and now where I think we've sort of built up this thing is where if I ask him how to go, he sometimes says, yeah, good. But sometimes this time he said, I wasn't myself today. And I said, well, what do you mean by that? I wasn't hitting my shots. I wasn't able to do the stuff that I normally can do. And I'm like, you know what? That's okay. Some days we show up and we're not able to do all that we're 100% capable of. And there's lots of reasons. But what was good for me and what I felt it immediately was this sense of, I guess, pride is another, that he was able to articulate that he wasn't there, and he was able to say it out loud.
Yep.
And there's that. And just that was really powerful for me, because I'm like, okay, he's starting to get the idea, and that this is some stuff we've been talking about, is that the failure is okay. And I said, the thing I said to him the other day is that if you're not able to accept that failure is part of the game, it's going to be difficult to learn new things. And so what I'm seeing is this progression. He's like,
can I throw something else?
Yeah, for sure.
Because you talk about acknowledgement first, acknowledging that this isn't me. But I think as an athlete and as a coach myself, I would say there'd be a second A. Is actually Michael Jordan's mindfulness teacher talked about it. It'd be acknowledging, and then his name is George Mumford, I believe. Acknowledging, and then the second A. There's 4 A's. The third, I think, second or third A, you guys can look this up independently, is adjustments. And Michael did this.
Yeah.
Tremendously.
Yes.
Yep. I don't have legs today. How else will I contribute to this thing? Or we will still have success. Am I going to get to the rim more? Am I going to defend harder? Because I can't shoot the ball well today, it doesn't mean I need to adjust.
I like how you coined it that way, because we've talked about those kinds of things, but I haven't had a specific definition of what the adjustment. I can lean into something else. Yeah. I can, because actually it's funny, we talked about that in the game. Sometimes like you're getting a lot of rebounds today, but maybe you're not scoring as much. But these other things you're doing, the rebounds, the defense, those things are all helping. And so maybe
we need to give value to those things as well.
100%.
So those still mean maybe not the same amount, because it doesn't reflect in the final score, but in everything else, ancillary wise, it's a support system of what success looks like.
It's funny you mention that, because I often
how many people in support systems don't get the credit, like
right.
I don't know, Elton John, one of the greatest musicians of all time, like the person who first taught him the piano. We never talk about that person.
We don't know about that, or the unseen helpers, or the people like back to my son. I was talking to him about you being in the key, your presence there as deep. I watched the game. If you're there, the game is different. When you're sitting on the bench, the game is different. That's not making the sheets, not making in rebounds, but I promise you, your presence there changes the game, and it does have an effect. And I'm just trying to get him to realize that not everything that's scored or recorded or whatever is not the all parts of the game. There are other parts where you can have a real difference that aren't showing up as easily, but you can see it. It's happening,
Yeah.
and there's a way to derive value from it. And you start like, so I see him like, okay, yeah, he's actually doing the things that are the unglamorous work.
The kids call that aura, and I think one person that's used specifically to in this as an example of this is World Wrestling Entertainment star Roman Reigns. He every time that he shows up like once every 2 to 3 shows to make it more special, as opposed to every week. And now he's actually on a long sabbatical because he was just the world champion for 3 years. So he just lost the championship in April, and he's taking some well-deserved time off to be with his family because he has I believe 4 kids, whatever.
Yeah.
But then some people, like, despite just like you say, like that presence of just being there, and I've had this said to me before, actually, like when I'm in the building for a basketball activity or like something psychological or like a philosophical conversation, the level just goes up. But I don't even have to do that much. It's just like just being present, because like it's all those times of that success has been achieved in the past that allows you to have a presence and to be grateful of that, I think.
I think you're modeling it, because when your presence there, people get to know in your community who you are, what you represent. And if you're here, I think if you're here, that means that this is possible. I think because if you're not here, then it's not possible.
We need a conduit.
And and maybe the person who's your stand-in or doing your job for the day won't respond or doesn't exude the same aura. And so I will not behave in the same way. Right. So I think that's also something that's high value. If your presence resonates and your aura is authentic, this is what it is. We can talk, we can do, we can say, and we can be okay. Then I think that's largely contagious. And I think when the right people come into that, they'll emanate that as well.
And let's keep the train on the tracks here as well. To be curious enough to be like, how can I help others create their own aura?
Yeah.
This isn't a narcissistic situation.
No.
Like, I create this because I am this. Like, I've worked hard to be this, of course.
Mm-hmm.
And I have a lot of impact on a lot of people. However, how does true greatness is creating that for other people and to allow others to be curious enough to create that for themselves?
I would say the second part, but I don't want to create it for other people. I want to guide people in order for them to create it for themselves.
Yeah.
Right. So and this is, I guess, part of what I try to do, because I tell my own students, like, I don't just accept what I say as gospel. Don't just let's try our best. If I model it, and if I'm not modeling it, I think that you should call it out, and that's okay. But I really would want them to get the idea that the environment here is such that, I can think about things, and maybe I can say what's important to me out loud in front of other folks. And even crossing that little line there allows one more step towards, a little bit more of the mirror work, looking at myself. I'm comfortable doing that. I did this now. I can do it again. And that sort of builds. And now I'm like a person where, I think I have some information about this. I'm going to say it.
Well, thinking, like you say.
And you may not agree, and that's okay. I'm still going to say. And maybe if you don't agree, you can retort, and maybe I may learn something that I didn't know before. And now we're in the part where we're both curious. You say something, I don't see the new information as threat, and we're able to play off that. And now that's where that contagion starts. We're in this thing, someone else is there, they join in, and I think once we create this environment where it's comfortable to be not all of the same idea, opinion, or mindset, but it's comfortable to be, hey, you disagree? Let's hear about that. Let me hear what your perspective is on that. And oh gosh, maybe I didn't know. And then we can go from there. And now it's more challenging. And now I'm not incentivized to just go into a place where everyone always agree with me all the time, because that's fine, but it's not real life.
Yep. And I think this is a good place to end.
Yeah.
I'm going to use nature as an example of this. Trees all look different. I'm not a tree expert, but
clearly,
I just look out. These things are all different heights, some of them are a slightly different color.
Yeah.
However, what I do know of my rudimentary science understanding is trees need sunlight to operate and to grow. However, trees don't hog the spotlight. Trees grow when they share the sun. So if I can link that to what we're talking about, are we curious enough to that if the sun is the truth, for example, we're gonna share. We're all gonna be different little pillars here, and we're gonna let photosynthesis do its thing, but we need to first be acceptance of like.
I'll accept the nourishment that is ever present and available.
And that's all I got today.
No, that's good. Excellent. All right. I'm spent.
Me too.